That was the theater, that saddle-shaped building that's now the House of Blues. What you can't think, you're also taking pictures of yourself, right? You can wave to yourself. So anytime you see a building that bends and forms with the land, we call that the There is 160,000 gallons of water on the top in tanks to keep it steady. So this one bends with the river, it bends with the road. Kohn Pedersen and Fox designed this in 19. Building next to it, that style of architecture is called brutalism. 20. We call it the DeSable Bridge. We named it the DeSable Bridge after our founding father, Jean-Baptiste. There's a statue of Jean-Baptiste Point DeSable right on top of that area, on top of Pioneer Court. Designed by a female architect, the beautiful one with the waves. Lady Gaga lived in that building too. And if any of you have ever seen the Netflix series, the Louisiana Purchase, we erected Fort Dearborn right there. So that was the exact location of Fort Dearborn in 1803. If you walk across Michigan and look down at the placards, you can see the outline of Fort Dearborn over there. The bridge in back of you is called the DuSable Bridge. We'll talk a little bit more about Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable on our journey today. He's considered the founding father of Chicago. He's our first permanent resident here. I'm going to leave the Wrigley building for when we come back because it's really beautiful when we see it from that direction looking face forward. So I'm going to start with the second tallest building, which is on your right, coming up on your right. That's the second tallest building in Chicago. It is the Trump International Hotel and Tower. The building is 1,388 feet tall. There is a spire on top, so today we'll talk about the difference between a spire and an antenna, but a lot of our buildings have spires on top. Spires are included in the height because it is part of the architectural design. So the building is 1,388 feet tall, 98 stories high. The first section is the garage, the whole second section is where the hotel is, and the entire top is where the residences are. Adrian Smith is the principal architect that designed this building. He designs really tall buildings. So Adrian Smith's from the Chicago area. He also designed the tallest building in the world to date, which is in Dubai, the Burj Khalifa, right? The Burj Khalifa is 2 times the size of the Trump International Tower, right? So he does do very, very, very tall buildings. Trump International Hotel and Tower completed in 2009. Now a fun fact, that building, 30 miles of glass surrounds it, right? That's from here to Gary, Indiana. That's a lot of glass. Mies van der Rohe is the next architect we're going to talk about. Mies van der Rohe is considered the pioneer of modernist architecture. His style, right to your right there, that's the AMA Plaza, that's called international style. You're going to see a lot of his influence here in Chicago. He was a teacher of architecture in Berlin. He came here and also taught architecture. So a lot of his students ended up following his way. His belief was less is more, function over form, skin and bones. But with every teacher, you always have a student that doesn't necessarily follow your path, right? So Bertram Goldberg was one of those students. Bertram Goldberg believed that there are no right angles in nature, therefore he's not putting any right angles in his building, right? Take a look. Marina City, completely different than the international style. So Marina City, built in 1965 and 1967. We call them the corncob towers. Sometimes you'll hear them called the corncob towers. These are the Marina Towers, probably the most photographed buildings here in Chicago. Bertram Goldberg, who was the architect, he was way ahead of his time. So he wanted people that worked in the city to live in the city. So he had a unique concept for that time. He decided to build a city within a city. He wanted everything that you can think about in that building. So you guys saw the marina, you saw the parking. When we pass the bridge, if you turn your heads around and look to the left of the parking, that was the theater, that saddle-shaped building that's now the House of Blues. What you can't see is the ice skating rink, the bowling alley, the swimming pool, the restaurants, the grocery store, the laundry. I mean, anything you can possibly think. The whole city within a city concept, having residential, entertainment, and commercial in one building. Brand new concept back then. And now we know that Many countries and cities have all followed suit with that city within a city concept. In 1914, the Reed Murdoch building was complete. This is an industrial warehouse. George Nimmons is the architect. If you look at the building is no longer symmetrical, but it was when it was built. So you have more columns on this side than you do on the left side. But when it was built in 1914, perfectly symmetrical. But in 1929, they needed to put this big LaSalle Street Bridge here. So they took out an entire section of the building, put the building back together again with the original brick, as if we wouldn't notice. I tell everybody. Eventually everybody's gonna know, right? We have over 700 green-friendly buildings here in Chicago. We call them LEED certified. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. The building next to us received a platinum rating. This building has no cooling towers. Look at the height of the building, right? How do you cool down a building this size? The river water. So we have 5 plants around the city. We send our river water to these plants at night. They don't freeze them completely. They get them down to 34 degrees the temperature, and then they pump them back to the buildings. That's how they cool down the buildings. That's our L. So it's very loud and noisy. So I don't usually try to talk over the L. 1931. This is the Merchandise Mart. Graham Anderson, Probst and White. This is an Art Deco building. So when you see a building with these strong vertical lines that draw your attention towards the top, deep setbacks and geometric shapes embedded, typically that's an Art Deco building. This one was built to consolidate 13 Marshall Field's warehouses into one building. Marshall Field's later became Macy's. The building, 4 million square feet inside, 5 acres big, right? So this is the second largest in the United States of this limestone concrete construction, second only to the Pentagon. Now it opened in 1931, that was the Great Depression. Didn't do very well, right? It didn't really serve its purpose. The Kennedys ended up buying the Merchandise Mart for $13 million. They ended up selling it in the 1990s for $575 million. So this area that we're going into now, this area is called Wolf Point. This is also what we call our junction. But in 1833, this was downtown Chicago. So in 1833, we had 300 people living here. Everybody socialized here. We had a tavern on each end. We had a hotel, post office, drugstore, theater. Everybody would socialize here. 190 years later, we're almost fully developed, building our last skyscraper. This is going to be a commercial skyscraper. It's pretty unique that we get to see a skyscraper, what it looks like from the inside out. So this is a commercial skyscraper. Commercial ones have huge reinforced concrete centers, and you can see that in the center now. And then they have the steel support beams on the outside. That's the 2 of them hold up the load for this commercial building. As we go past it, you're going to see that they're starting to put the glass up on the side of the walls here, right? You can see it a little bit in the front. You could also see it in the side. Architecturally, we call that putting up the curtain. So they're now starting to put up the curtain. And if you can notice, they really just hang the curtains on the side of the beams. There's areas that they actually just hang the wall up there, the curtain wall up there. Right in back of it, BKL are the architects. That's a beautiful luxury apartment building, complete in 2015. And now I'm going to take you guys over to your left and straight ahead. That's the Residence at River Bend, that building that bends with the river. So on the bottom is the townhomes. On the top are the condos. Everybody in that building purchased because of their view. On the west side is just their front doors and the mechanics in the garage, right? Everybody purchased because they all have views of the city, the river, if they're high enough, of the lake. It was complete in 2002. James DeStefano is the architect. Coming up on the oldest building here on our river, this beautiful red brick building. It was complete in 1898. It was not a condo in 1898, right? So picture the building without windows, without balconies. It was a cold storage warehouse. We would insulate it with cork and horsehair. That's how we would insulate back then. So it wasn't until 1982 that an architect named Harry Weiss, also from the Chicago area, took over the building, converted it to condos. Harry Weiss loves nautical themes, so he's the one that put the starfish up, the portholes up on the top. He also did the cottages on the river directly to your left. These are 4 individual townhomes, also with that nautical theme. These were complete in 1988. In 1988, each one sold between $300,000 and $500,000. Every one but one are still original owners. So one has sold, in 2015, one sold for $2.25 million. So I'm going to take you guys back to your right. In the 1970s, Daniel Levin decided he wanted to build apartments. That's really what the intent was over here. He wanted to have apartments on this side of the river. He went to the bank to ask for financing. The bank turned him down. The bank turned him down because they said to him, nobody wants to live on the river, and nobody wants to live on the north side of Chicago. That's why they turned him down. So he got some friends together. They ended up building a fitness club. This is a really exclusive fitness club. Now they were going on a limb at that time too, because in the 1970s, fitness clubs weren't really all the rage as they are now. But right now, this fitness club has over 11,000 members, so it is a very profitable fitness club. Now look across the way. So remember I told you the bank wouldn't finance here, right, for the apartments? By 2002, everybody wanted to live on the river. So Papa George and Hames are the architect that designed these beautiful 70 European row houses here on the river. This is called Kinsey Park. Every one of these row houses, they all have their own private balcony up on their bedroom. So the top level is where their bedrooms are. The bottom level where the other balcony is, that's their kitchens. And they open up at the bottom floor into their library. So they're really beautiful, beautiful row houses here. Each one sold for over $1.2 million. Each one sold before they even broke ground. So I think the banks were quite wrong on this side, right, to not having to finance something. And people wouldn't want to live on the river because they absolutely want to live on the river now. By the way, inside this fitness area, so we have, this fitness area is so large that they have multiple of everything. Multiple tennis courts, racquetball courts, basketball courts, multiple swimming pools, cardio, track, I mean, you name it, everything's inside. Some of the famous people that had memberships in this club: Oprah Winfrey was a member, Barack Obama, a member, Billie Jean King, a member in the club as well. Now in Chicago, I'm going to take you guys to your right again for a little bit. In Chicago, we don't really like getting rid of the old buildings. We'd rather repurpose everything. So we call it adaptively reused. So the building to your right, it was built in 1912. This was an old paper mill. So it was an old paper mill in 1912. It was converted to condo lofts. So when you see the balconies with those suspension wires on the outside, that's usually the giveaway that we've adaptively reused that building into a condo loft building. I also live in a building that was adaptively reused. So my building is late 1890s, where I live right now. It was adaptively reused to a discotheque in the 70s. If I'm dating myself, that's a dance club, right? And then in the 1990s, it was adaptively reused to the condo lofts that I live in now. So we do that all the time here in Chicago. The park that we're moving into now, this is called Montgomery Park. It's a 4.5-acre park in the River North District. So this is a pretty exclusive area of Chicago. There's 2 buildings I'm going to point out with European industrial design. So European industrial has the steel columns, has the steel support beams on the outside of the building. They're showing the support beams. So Erie on the Park is on the left. Kinsbury on the Park is right in back of that. Lucien Lagrange is the architect that did both of those Those are the only European industrial buildings you'll see here in Chicago. The building all the way towards the back with that beautiful blue glass, that's called the Montgomery. That was the administrative building in 1974 for Montgomery Ward back in the day. The architect that did that building, Minoru Yamasaki, same architect that did the Twin Towers in New York City as well. So this whole park again is called Montgomery. It's named after Aaron Montgomery Ward. How many of you have heard of Montgomery Wards? More than usual. That's like 20 people. Usually I get 5. Like hardly anybody has heard of Montgomery Wards. But all of you have heard of Amazon, right? So everybody's heard of Amazon and everybody knows Jeff Bezos. So to relate it to those that haven't heard of Montgomery Ward, Aaron Montgomery Ward was the Jeff Bezos of 1872, right? He started the mail order catalog here in Chicago, really in the whole world. He started the mail order catalog. It happened to be in Chicago. 1872, he started with $1,600. He put the first catalog together, one page, 163 items. Montgomery Ward was a traveling salesman, so he knew that the people in the farmlands and the rural areas were not able to get the same merchandise that the people in the city could, and definitely not at the same prices. So he thought that he would start this whole mail order catalog business, and he also knew we were the capital, the railroad capital of the United States, so anything can be shipped out of here. So the first catalog, 1872, by 1904, the catalog was 500 pages, 10,000 items in the catalog, right? So he was doing really well in 1904. Now we're mailing these catalogs to over 3 million people. He needed a complex. This whole area, everything we're now passing on the right-hand side, all part of Aaron Montgomery Ward's complex. This was the original administrative building, the original headquarters that has been adaptively reused into condos. I'm going to have you all turn your head back around and look up high as soon as we get under the bridge, up to the tower up there. You can see the statue of the Spirit of Progress. If you did happen to miss it, we'll see it on the way back because we're going to turn around here. So that is the Spirit of Progress. She's the one that would overlook all of Montgomery Ward's complex. The building to your right, this was the warehouse. This building built in 1906, it's called the Domain. Schmidt, Gardner, and Martin are the architects. They were very influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, so it's a Frank Lloyd Wright kind of look, but it's not him. So the whole style is prairie style. If you worked for Montgomery Ward in this warehouse in 1906, and you moved merchandise, the gates are getting pretty close, right? And you moved merchandise from one end over to shipping to the other end, you needed to roller skate. It was a requirement, right? You needed to be efficient for 8 hours. This is 2.5 football fields long, so you needed to be able to do that efficiently. Those are the old roller skates that you used to put your shoes into and tighten with a key. When Groupon moved in, they found a room with over 300 pair of those roller skates inside. They would have to dress up everybody, so they would wear, black slacks, a white shirt, a bow tie, and roller skates. And for 8 hours, back and forth, moving merchandise to the shipping. That landmass that we just passed, and I think that's where the geese are going, that's called Goose Island. It's kind of ironic that they're going over there, right? So it was almost like cue the geese, right? And this is like, so that area, that landmass is called Goose Island. It was created, it's a man-made island. It was created because our mayor, back in the day, Mayor William Ogden, used to make bricks. The bottom of our river is clay. So he would dredge the river in order to get the clay out to be able to make the bricks. And that's what created that landmass. Now it's called Goose Island because of the immigrants that used to live on the island and feed the geese. Hence, that's where they get the name Goose Island. All right, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of history lesson. So I'm not going to be talking about any of the buildings for a little bit, not until we get down a little bit further. There's not much to talk about right now, because right now we need to develop this area again. Everything here is scheduled to be sold or developed, so we're not going to talk about the buildings just yet until they do get developed. So I am going to give you a little bit of history lesson on Chicago. If you'd like to go downstairs, get something to drink, use the restrooms, you'll still be able to hear me. But just so you know, we're not going to be looking at any buildings. So in I'm going to wait till after the bridge. In 1673, there were two guys that were given a mission to map out the Mississippi River. Their names were Marquette and Joliet, and they were given this mission from the French government just underneath Canada, right at the top of Michigan. So they were given the mission to map out the Mississippi River, because in 1673, the French government didn't know where the Mississippi drained out into. They had three options at that time. Did it drain out to the Atlantic Ocean by Virginia, the Gulf of Mexico, or the Sea of California into China? That's kind of what they thought. They had no idea, right? So they were on this mission. The only way they knew to get to the Mississippi was to go from Michigan over to Wisconsin, right? So they went over to Wisconsin. They took the Wisconsin River down to the Mississippi, and then they went all the way down as far as the Arkansas River. They never made it any further, but they were able to validate that sure enough, the Mississippi went into the Gulf of Mexico. So mission accomplished. They're on their way back. On the way back, they meet some very nice Native Americans. They start telling them about their journey and about their journey home. The Native Americans kind of look at them, why would you go that direction? Let us show you a shortcut. So the Native Americans tell them, all you need to do is go up the Mississippi, make a right on the Illinois River. From the Illinois River, you're going to meet a Chicago portage. You're probably going to have to pick up your canoe, they told them, because it's too muddy and swampy there. You're probably going to have to pick up your canoe and walk about 1.5 miles across. Once you walk across that, you're going to go into the Chicago River. That river will then take you into the Great Lake. So Joliet and Marquette did exactly that. Now the Native Americans did go with them, and they kept talking about the area as Chickagowa, the Chickagowa River and the Chickagowa Portage. They didn't really understand what Chickagowa really meant until they got into the Chicago River. Once they got into the Chicago River, lined up and down the side of the river were these very stinky, smelly onions that the Native Americans called Chickagowa, right? Fast forward, Chickagowa is Chicago, right? We are named after stinky, smelly onions. It's true. It is true. So Joliet and Marquette made it to that Great Lake. They knew at that moment anything built on this Great Lake will be poised for greatness. They also knew that all they needed to do is kind of build some kind of ditch, some kind of canal through that portage in order to let boats actually go back and forth from the Mississippi to the Illinois River, to the Chicago River, to the Great Lake. But this is 1673, right? They didn't really, the only people that knew about the shortcut for the longest time were the fur traders. And the fur traders, one of them ended up to become our founding father. So one of those fur traders came through the shortcut, 1779, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. So he ended up settling, the first non-Native American ended up settling here in Chicago, right on the mouth of Lake Michigan. I'm going to show you later on, as we're going back that direction, where he settled, where his trading post was and his home was. So he's considered our first permanent resident. Now, it wasn't until 1848 that we ended up finally building a canal through that portage, right? So it took a long time to build that canal. It's called the Michigan-Illinois Canal. We built that canal in 1848. That's when really Chicago started to grow a lot quicker, because now we were able to move things through the waterway. Do you remember, as we go down, remember where the river cottages are? In 1848, that's the exact location also of our first railroad depot here in Chicago. So in 1848, William Ogden he also had the first railroad here. And the first railroad was from Chicago to Galena. It would move grain back and forth. The exact location was where the river cottages are now. I'm going to talk about the bridges coming up. So the one in the up position, that's the Kinsey Street Railroad Bridge. It will remain in the up position because we don't use it any longer, but we do test it every year so that it can remain on the historic register, because that is the oldest bridge on our river, 1908. We used that bridge from 1908 to 2000. We were still using it when the Chicago Sun-Times was here to move newspapers back and forth over the bridge into their building. But when they moved out, we had no use for the bridge any longer. The bridge in front of it, the Kinsey Street Bridge, that's where the Chicago flood happened. So we didn't just have a Great Chicago Fire, we had the Great Chicago Flood too. So if you look to the left, everybody, those pylons, those wood pylons around the bridge, that's what protects our bridges from the big barges that we have going through our river. So in the end of 1991, we hired a company to replace those pylons. So the company replaced the pylons, but nobody told them what was underneath. Underneath the pylons, underneath our city, are 60 miles of tunnels. We used those tunnels from 1904 to the mid-1950s. We used them to move coal, ash, and merchandise between some of our buildings. The Merchandise Mart was one of them, Civic Opera Building, Marshall Field. I mean, a lot of our buildings had these tunnels underneath, and that's how we would move coal and ash and even some merchandise. Well, when they put the piling in, they must have punctured a hole. They had no idea. So all of a sudden, now we're into 1992, and the buildings keep complaining that they keep getting water in their basement. They don't know why. April of 1992, the buildings start calling up and say, wait a minute, we have over 40 feet of water in our basement. The merchandise calls, we not only have 40 feet of water in our basement, we now have fish, right? So at that time, they knew there must be some kind of hole punctured. They figure it out, they go back. By that time, this is now a hole. The hole is like a car-sized hole. 250 million gallons of water ended up in the tunnels underneath our city, right? We had to pump them out billions of dollars later. So that's the Great Chicago Flood of 1992. We're going to start with the building here on your right. That's called River Point. Picard and Chilton are the architects. The building is built over the railroad tracks. So you can see the ventilation below. It's also over the blue line L, right? So both are there. In order to get the support beams around the tracks and around the L, they ended up having to bend the support beam. That's what created that beautiful arch. That building was complete in 2016. The statue in front is called the Constellation. Santiago Calatrava is the artist. And now take a look at another building built over railroad tracks. This one is pretty amazing because it kind of looks a little gravity defying. And we're going to see it a little bit better once we get through the bridge. The building has a 40-foot base, that's it. So it's only 40 feet at the base. It then goes out 120 feet and then up 54 stories high. As we're passing it, you can all see our reflection also. So if you're taking pictures of the building, you're also taking pictures of yourself, right? You can wave to yourself. So remember, 40-foot base, out 120 feet, up 54 stories high. The building also over railroad tracks. This is a really busy section of railroad tracks. So Guest and Partners are the architects. They bought the lot. The lot is 2.5 acres. But because they're over such a busy section of railroad tracks, and to figure out how to get the steel support columns around the tracks and into the bedrock, and because they're so close to the river, they were only able to use 25% and ended up building a building that looks like it was built upside down. It's pretty cool. The building next to us, the Boeing Tower, also built over railroad tracks, 1990. Perkins and Will are the architects. Hello. So the Boeing Tower had no problem getting in around the track straight down with the steel support columns. The south side couldn't do that. The south side is all over the railroad switching station, so they were not allowed to go down below with any kind of steel support columns. So they ended up having to ask the engineer to come up with a way to suspend the south side. So what the engineer did, they built it ever so slightly tilting to the tall tower, and then they hold up the top with 5 metal trusses. So as we go under the bridge, you can turn your heads around if you'd like and look on top of the building. You can see one of them, and as we're pulling away, you'll see the others, but there are 5 metal trusses. So that's it. Just a slight tilt to the tall tower, and then those 5 trusses hold up that south side of the building. Pretty genius. So the Art Deco building next to us, Halliburton Route, 1920s. This was the old Daily News building. First building built over the railroad tracks. But I'm going to have you guys look at the clock tower and look at the number 4. It's not a Roman numeral, right? So that's the only non-Roman numeral on that clock. Everything else is the proper Roman numerals. And the reason why they did this in the 19-teens and the 1920s, because at that time wristwatches were considered a luxury. People did not own watches, so in order to tell time easy, they looked at the clock towers. And the clockmakers thought that it looked more symmetrical to the number 8 by doing the 4 with the 4 lines as opposed to the 1 and the V. So you'll see a few of them around the city too. So everything here, I talked about the other buildings over railroad tracks, and now you'll be able to see them. Gateway 1 is the building directly on top here, built by Skidmore, Owens, and Murals. They were students of Mies van der Rohe, so that international influence, international style. And here is where Amtrak and Metra either start or come back to. So this is all hooked up to the Ogilvy Station or Union Station. From here you can see the Amtrak train on the inside. Gateway 1 and Gateway 2 are identical buildings, both built in the 1960s. We're going to be going under a bridge under a street. It's called Adam Street. This is also Route 66. So Route 66 starts here in Chicago, just a couple of blocks east. On Michigan and Adams, you'll see that historic sign. This is Route 66, right in front of the Museum of Art. On the west side, nobody on the west side has to lease the land, right? They all have to lease the air. So everybody on the west side of the river here, over the tracks, all have to pay air rights to the railroad. So that was Gateway 1 and 2 done in the 60s. Gateway 3 is right here on our right. This was done in the 1970s. Same architect, Skidmore, Owens, and Murals. They also did Gateway 4. So Gateway 4 is coming up on your right, the one that curves to the river. That style of architecture is called contextualism. So anytime you see a building that bends and forms with the land, we call that contextualism. It picks up everything in its path as you're going. So not only can you see the railroad tracks underneath, you can also see the buildings now in this reflection of this building. If you look across the way now to your left-hand side, you're going to see a mural. That mural on the outside of the building is a mural of our river. That box is "You Are Here." This is the largest "You Are Here" sign, right? So that's exactly where we are at the moment on the river. The people that own this building, kind of genius, because nobody really talked about this building other than international style, Mies van der Rohe, right? Nobody talked about it until they put the mural up. Now, of course, we all talk about it, everybody mentions it, everybody takes pictures of it now. In 1921, we built the old post office. And if there's any Dark Knight fans on board, anybody seen Dark Knight? So this building was where the first scene was filmed, where they went into the bank, right? They had a robbery in the bank, so they took over our post office. It wasn't really a bank, it was a post office, but so 1921, this post office was completed. It's an Art Deco building. It is now being completely restored to its 1920s glory. So a company just purchased the building in 2016 and is completely restoring the building. This highway goes through the post office. So the post office is so large that this highway actually goes through the post office. We needed a large post office in 1921 because of all the catalogs we're mailing out of Chicago, right? So we are the mail order catalog hub of the United States. We're mailing out all kinds of catalogs from Spiegel, from Montgomery Ward, Sears and Roebuck, Marshall Field, you name it, everybody's mailing out catalogs. The post office became inefficient by the 1990s though. There was no technology. So in the 1990s, we ended up building a new post office. That building was left abandoned. And it wasn't until 2006 that somebody bought the building at an auction. His name was Bill Davies. So he bought the entire post office at an auction for $20 million. Not a bad price for the size of the building. Bill Davies wanted to have the right buyer, so he waited until he found the right buyer for the right price. Finally, the company doing that building now, 601W, purchased that building in 2016 for $120 million. So he made a good profit, right? The day after they closed, Bill Davies died. He never got to spend a bit of the money. Now, rumor has it he really died a couple of days before, but no one wanted to say anything for fear that the contract really wouldn't go through. But either way, he never was able to spend a bit of that money. I'm going to take you guys to your left. This area is called Riverside. So this whole area, Perkins and Will, are creating a new development here on the south branch of the river. This is the south branch of the river. We're heading towards the park at Chinatown now. So right here, they're building condos, they're building rentals, they're building townhomes, a little bit of everything will be over here. Brand new river walk as well. That stone was taken from the first Union Station that we had here in Chicago as well, so kind of historic river walk. There's another building coming up on your left-hand side that is not as new as the rest of the buildings will be. This is called River City. So if it looks familiar to a building that we saw on the main branch of the river, it's because it's the same architect, Bertram Goldberg. So Bertram Goldberg built Marina City in the 1960s. River City was done in the 1980s. So Bertram Goldberg wanted to kind of do the same concept here on the south branch of the river that he did on the main branch of the river, a city within a city. He wanted to build 4 of these. This was the only one that ever ended up to be built. At that time in the 1980s, people didn't necessarily want to live on the south branch of the river. And, you know, timing's everything, right? Because now this is the only area now being completely redeveloped and developed fully. I'm going to show you where the Great Chicago Fire started, so you're going to need to look to your right. You can see a Marshall's and then an LA Fitness, right? That's not where it was. And behind that is a radio tower, right? So you see this tall radio tower. I don't know if you can see the color, but it is white and red. But that's the tall radio tower. That's the exact location of the Great Chicago Fire on October 8, 1871. It's also the exact location now of the Chicago Training Fire Academy, right? So we put it to good use. So I don't know how many of you know about the Great Chicago Fire. You know how it started? It wasn't a cow. Everybody thinks it's a cow. It wasn't a cow. So that's the legend, right? So, but she was blamed for it for a good 20 years. So a lot of people thought it was a cow. And the legend goes like this. So it did happen. It happened in Catherine O'Leary's barn. That radio tower is the exact location of the barn. Now the legend was that Catherine O'Leary was in her barn at 9 o'clock at night milking her cow. The cow tipped over the bucket that tipped over the lantern. The first clue should have been Catherine O'Leary's in her barn at 9 o'clock at night milking a cow. Nobody does that. Nobody milks a cow at 9 o'clock at night. She kept telling everybody she was sleeping, but nobody believed her because within 48 hours, 72 hours, there was already articles written about the cow, right? So they already blamed it on the cow. The news reporters needed to come up with something as to a reason why the whole city basically burned down. So they blamed it on the cow. What really happened is Mr. O'Leary and the neighborhood men gambled in the barn all the time. So they were gambling and a fight broke out, right? They weren't going ahead and admit to it because the whole city was just burned down, right? And already, by the time anybody was asking about it, they were blaming a cow. So they were okay with that, it seemed like, right? They were never going to go ahead and admit that they just started the worst disaster, the worst fire here in Chicago's history. 2 days before the fire, the Tribune predicted that there was going to be a really bad fire in Chicago. The reason why is because everything was so dry. It hadn't rained more than 1/4 of an inch since July. So this is October. Everything in 1871 built out of wood. So the homes, the bridges, the sidewalks, the roads, it didn't matter, everything out of wood because that was the cheapest form of material at that time. So everything was very dry, and the Tribune basically said, you know, we've had a lot of little fires over the summer, something big's gonna happen, so they kind of predicted it. Well, that night, also 25-mile-hour winds. So after this fight breaks out, right, and they start the fire in the barn, to boot, there's now 25-mile-hour winds up above. So that's, the winds just start to carry the fire. Fire devils start to create in the air. The fire starts jumping from house to house, from building to building, right, all over the place. Now the fire starts out west. You see this south branch here. It crosses the south branch. In 1871, our river is so polluted, it just ignited it, right? So it went over the south branch of the river into the central part of town, and then up north, right? 4 miles, almost 4 miles of our city completely destroyed in about a little over 48 hours, right? 17,000 homes and businesses gone. We had 300,000 people living in Chicago at that time. 100,000 people left homeless. So we needed to start rebuilding pretty quickly. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I want to point out the Amtrak yard. So we are the hub of the United States, the railroad hub of the United States. We connect everywhere from here. Amtrak has about 67 acres, 22 different tracks that connect all over the United States. This is where they do their maintenance, and this is where the trains and their dispatch, that's the dispatch office over there. So the trains, this is where they come at night to go to bed, get cleaned up, do their maintenance, and then go back over in the morning. To your left, we're building a brand new community. So Chicago, we have 77 communities currently right now. We are building the 78. We are going to call it the 78. Right? So that'll be called the 78. This is 64 acres that'll be developed. The Discovery Partners are going to be a huge influence in this area, as well as the University of Illinois. We're going to have the red line come down this direction. We'll have condos, apartments. We're going to have a beautiful 12-acre park. The park will be crescent shaped. So the park will go inward as a crescent shape. And there's a reason for that, because this river used to go in that direction in the crescent shape, right? We straightened this river in 1930. Right? We straightened a lot of things. We do a lot of engineering here in Chicago. So we straightened this river in 1930, but it used to go that direction. So we're going to make the park look similar. I'm going to show you a bridge that used to go over not only the straight part, but when it was a crescent shape, we had an extension. So we're coming up on the St. Charles Airliner Bridge, which is coming up on your right-hand side. That was an old railroad bridge built in 1919. That was the bridge that used to go over and connect right over here. Now this was the connection once it was straightened. It was different when it curved in, so they had a longer extension on the bridge. We don't use it any longer, but we still test it for historic purposes. This is called the Bascule-Trunnion Bridge. I love to talk about this bridge because look at the size of the counterweights. So as we pass the bridge, you can see the cement counterweights, the concrete counterweights. Those counterweights is what opened and closed a bridge this size. Right? It's pretty impressive when you see it because they're not hidden. The counterweights aren't hidden. On our bridges on the main part of the river, also Bascule-Trunnion bridges. They also have counterweights, not that large, but they're in the bridge houses so you can't see them. On that one you can see. We're just about at the park in the Chinatown neighborhood. So as soon as you guys can see the red fencing, that's the beginning of Ping Tom Park. The red fencing was chosen on purpose because red represents good fortune. So that's why the color. The park is called Ping Tom Park. Ping Tom was a civic leader in the Chinatown neighborhood. Very instrumental in the neighborhood for all kinds of reasons. Very politically involved in the neighborhood. Also extremely instrumental building this park, or getting the park built here in the Chinatown neighborhood. Chinatown is just maybe a couple of blocks south and 2 blocks east. So Wendella has a water taxi that we operate on the weekends that comes down here to this red, that red building right there, that red structure. So if you're here on the weekends, take the water taxi, come down here, walk on over, it's just 2 blocks over to the Chinatown area, have some dinner, have some lunch, or maybe even bring it back and eat here in the park. It's a beautiful park. Those 2 painted murals underneath that road, they're done by a local artist. Her name is Anna Murphy, so she's from the Pilsen area. She paints some beautiful murals around the city. She's done one in the West Loop as well. Park was completed in 1999. So unfortunately, Ping Tom never got to see the final results of the park because he ended up passing away in 1995. But this is because of him that we ended up building this beautiful park, the beautiful pagoda there on your left. And there's a statue of Ping Tom's head right to the right of that. The last bridge I'm going to show you is right in front of you, and we're going to be turning, so you should all be able to see it in a moment. It's called the Canal Street Railroad Lift Bridge. It's still operational. It was built in 1914. That's how the railroad gets over the river from here. So from the Amtrak yard, if they need to go onto this side, that's how they get over, through the Canal Street Railroad Bridge. If there is a tall boat that needs to come through, the entire center gets lifted. So if you look on the sides, you can see the cables on both sides. So the entire center needs to be lifted in order to let tall boats come through. There's nobody in the bridge house. So this is operated exclusively from the Amtrak yard, from their dispatch office. Thank you, Captain. We never get this close, so we're getting a really beautiful picture. The only thing I can now do is cue the train to come across, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty impressive that this bridge is still operational, built in 1914. They still use it every day, numerous times a day. The railroad still comes across it. All right, so we're turning around here. That means we're going to be heading back up the South Branch, so we're going to be heading north. As we go up, I'm going to have them turn the music on, because I could use a little water myself. So I'm going to have them turn the music on. Good opportunity to go downstairs, see Lauren if you need something to drink, use the restrooms. Also, as we're heading back, you're going to see some beautiful, beautiful sceneries of the city. You're going to be able to use that as your backdrop. So if you use the top of the boat, right, for your backdrop, you'll be able to take pictures with the city in your backdrop. So I'm going to pick up the tour as we get a little bit closer towards the city again, but I will be up here to either help take pictures or answer questions. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to have a little bit of water.
¿Ese es Chinatown? Sí, sí. Ah, lo vendieron primero. Ya. Vamos por el otro lado, para atrás. Detrás de ahí. Acá venimos siempre con el gordo a caminar, a descansar, nos subimos a la ropa.
Esas pinturas están bonitas.
Ajá. Sí, una loción los dos a nuestro facial.
Aquí pueden rentar kayaks. Eso es las nuevas
Estuvimos parqueados, ¿se acuerdan? Detrás de los edificios que pasamos y que no había parking. Ahí estuvimos.
Oraya mı oturacaksın? Otur. Otur oraya.
Siente rico.
Yeah.
Oraya düşeceksin anne.
If you look to the right, there's a tall white building with a bunch of boxes bundled together. That's called the NEMA. Vignole is the architect. That's the tallest apartment building here in Chicago. It's just under 900 feet tall. The architect was inspired by the Sears Tower, the Willis Tower, because it's got kind of that same bundled look. And so when we go by the Sears Tower, Willis Tower, we'll talk about that building. It has over 800 apartments. And again, it's the tallest apartment building here in Chicago.
¿Cuál edificio?
Aquel blanco que parece el Sears Tower. Pero sí.
Ya. Que hicieron inspirado del Sears Tower, de edificios de gente también. De allá. ¿Es alto? Estuvo inspirado al Sears Tower. Claro, pues no, ¿te parece?
Yeah.
Ahí está el Sears Tower, y ahí está.
La misma vista hasta abajo.
Ya. Ya, es el Sears Tower. Claro, ahí está mismo. Y el de allá, el verde de acá, que tiene como así, está inspirado en ese edificio, en ese vivienda. Para allá,
Hayır yapma öyle demezsin. Hayır cam olmaz orada var ki.
También me dijo que podía ser realtor, ¿verdad? También.
Ayağını sürme, ayakları pis, ayağını sürme.
Agente de bienes raíces. Tienen un grupo grande, ¿eh?
Telefonu vereyim mi? Şarkı açalım diye bir şarkı. Gel bir şarkı açalım. Gitme Deniz.
Ok.
Hayır.
Burası yüksek, gel buraya. Gel telefonla şarkı açacağız. Gel. Şarkı açacağız.
nueva. Esta está mejor que, más grande que, más grande que tu viejo.
¿La otra vez?
Que de otra de tu mami. Con tu mamá salimos al lago.
Era más chico también.
Era más chico el barco y era... Nos fuimos hasta Chinatown.
Pero la otra vez también fuimos a
No, no llegamos a Chinatown. Agarramos por el downtown, metimos al Lake Michigan. Y ahí volteamos. Parqueamos por Lake Michigan. Dimos la vuelta en Lake Michigan en el Canal. Este se ha ido por el río completamente.
Somebody had asked what that old building is over there on the left. So that's an old power plant for the Amtrak yard. It's no longer in use. But remember we talked about we don't like to get rid of our old buildings? That's a 1920s building. We don't want to get rid of it. We'd rather repurpose it or adapt or reuse it. So we're trying to figure out who can use it or where, if it can ever be used. Because it's kind of an odd place here on the river and right by the tracks. But it looks like it could be like a brewery, right? Or a distillery or something like that. Was that your idea? But I think it's full of a lot of hazmat in there right now, so they gotta...
Una vez tenían un cando de venta aquí en este edificio. Tenían un cando de venta. Te lo fui a ver y entré al cando. Me pasó una cárcel. Todo de cemento. Se mete hasta tu habitación. Todo es de cemento. Todo.
Baker, en la parte de abajo es Baker. Puro Modernist, 700. Sí se nota, poca ventana adentro.
Yeah. We're about to build something here.
Me van a construir algo y van a tapar la laguna.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and, while we're getting closer to the city, I'm going to pick up the tour again. So I'm going to have you guys look to your right and to your 1 o'clock. There's a building with a statue on top, right? So we're going to talk about that building first, as soon as this apartment building kind of gets out of our way. The one with the statue on top, that building is the Chicago Board of Trade. So that was built in 1930. Holabird and Root are the architects. It's an Art Deco building. The statue on top is Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. So in 1930, when it was complete, it was the tallest building in Chicago for about 15 years. So that was the tallest building in Chicago. And now I'm going to have you guys look forward, that beautiful pink granite building. So we're not going to talk about the tallest yet. So look at the pink granite building in front of it. Cohn, Pedersen, and Fox are the architects. The inspiration for the design was another building here in Chicago. This is considered a postmodern building, but they were inspired by the Tribune Tower. So the top was supposed to look like a modern version of the Tribune Tower with the cylinders and the look-up on top. That is probably the most well-lit building here in Chicago. There are about 1,800 fluorescent light bulbs in that large cylinder. But if you ever see it go dark or dim, that's because twice a year we have birds that like to migrate at night, right? So we go dark or dim when they like to migrate because we don't want them to go into the light, right? So if you ever see it, it's because it's migration season. And now we're going to talk about the tallest building here in Chicago. That's the building right in back of it. Some people in Chicago will forever call it the Sears Tower. Legally, it's called the Willis Tower. They purchased the naming rights in 2009. So I will call it the Sears Willis Tower. So the Sears Willis Tower was built in 1974. It was the tallest building in the world for 24 years. And we're going to be able to see it again as soon as we go through the bridge. It is 1,450 feet tall, 110 stories high. The height does not include the antenna, right? So if there's an antenna on a building, you cannot include it in the height because antennas are not part of the architectural structure or design. So antennas can be removed. So again, the building 1,450 feet tall. If you look on the 103rd floor on the west side, you're going to see 4 glass boxes. That's called sky deck. That's where the ledge is, right? So you can go up in the elevators. They go up pretty fast, about 1,600 feet per minute. And don't worry, we're going to see the building again twice more. So we're going to keep getting closer and closer to it. On the west side, you'll see those glass boxes. That's called the ledge. Those boxes are about 4.5 feet away from the building. So that's where the observation deck is. Does anybody do that on board already, right? It's not so bad, right? Anybody going to do it soon? You'll like it, right? So definitely bring your camera. So we're going to be able to see the building twice more as soon as we pass this building with the mural. You'll get a lot closer to the building. The building is made of 9 boxes bundled together. They call that tubular bundled construction. So Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill are the architects. Fosler Khan is the engineer. I'm going to tell you in a minute how he was inspired or what inspired them to come up with this. But your last opportunity to take a picture, if you look at that tree and then look straight ahead. So right after we pass the building and look at the tree and look straight ahead, you will be able to see Sears Tower, Willis Tower from the ground up. So now you can really see the height of this building. So there are 9 boxes bundled together. Each box is 75 feet in diameter. That's what gives it its stability. The building has the ability to sway about 30 inches. It doesn't usually go that far. And the design was inspired because of cigarettes, right? So the engineer, Fosler Khan, and also the architects were sitting over lunch trying to figure out how to build the tallest building in the world. And they had a pack of cigarettes. They were packing the cigarettes, and a couple, popped out at different heights. And they were like, whoa, I think we've got something. And then they started taking out the cigarettes and kind of playing with them together to see if they can support it that way. So that is where they got the inspiration from. Now somebody in 1981 decided to climb that building. His name was Dan Goodwin. So Memorial Day 1981, Dan Goodwin gets up in the morning. He puts on his Spider-Man costume because you need to dress appropriately if you're going to climb, at that time, the Sears Tower. And with suction cups, he goes to the top. He makes it to the top, so thank goodness he wasn't hurt, where he was arrested, right? You're not allowed to do that. You cannot climb the skyscrapers here. He didn't stop. Same year, he went over to the John Hancock building, right? So the fire department was so over Dan Goodwin that year, so by the time he got over to the John Hancock building, they started hosing him down, right? So the mayor stopped that because that was not going to go well at the end. But the building next to us here on the right, that's the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center, built in the 1990s. Fujikawa and Johnson are the architects. That is another building or another piece that has the middle is suspended by the 2 40-story buildings next to it, right? So that's a trading area. They weren't allowed to put any kind of walls or steel columns in there because you need to leave it free and clear for hand signals or people yelling at you, sell trade. so they ended up suspending it between two 40-story buildings.
The Civic Opera.
1929, the Civic Opera building was complete. Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White are the architects. This style of architecture is called French Renaissance. This is the second largest opera house in the United States, second only to the Met, that's in New York City. If you look at the word building, you're going to notice there's a V instead of a U. That's because they were using the Roman alphabet back then, and U's and V's were interchangeable. A little bit of history. The building opened November 4th. I can't talk over that, right? The building opened November 4th, 1929. That was the week after the worst week of the stock market crash. Our newest building directly to your right, this one was completed in 2020, the Bank of America building. This building is built on an odd-shaped piece of land. So the south side is wider than the north side. So you look at how they ended up, kind of going inward towards the north side. So the south side is larger than the north side. Even the columns on the outside. Guest and Partners are the architects for this building. They're pretty used to building buildings on odd-sized pieces of land because they're the same architects that did the one now coming up on your left, the one that looks like it's upside down. Exact same architects, so they're pretty good about building buildings on odd-sized pieces of land. There is one thing that I neglected to tell you about that building though. So because of the odd shape, they needed something else to keep it from swaying. So on top of this building is a mass water dam system. There is 160,000 gallons of water on the top in tanks to keep it steady, to keep it from not swaying, right? The building next to you has no significance, but the area does. So in 1860, this is where we held the Republican National Convention. This is where we nominated our 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Where that Nuveen building is, the one that bends, that's where the first hotel was in 1833. And just in front of the Bridge House, that whole area was where the first post office was in 1833. So that whole area, very significant, very historical. The building that bends, that style of architecture, contextualism. So we saw another building down the river a little bit. This one you can really see very clearly. Contextualism always follows the land. So this one bends with the river, it bends with the road. Kohn Pedersen and Fox designed this in 1983. Two shades of glass they chose. The lighter shade of green is our river color in the sun, and the darker shade was the river at night or in the shade. Now when we pass it, it picks up everything in its path. That's what contextualism kind of buildings typically do. You can even see the crane on top of the building behind. You can see the merchandise mart in the corner. Now, if anybody's ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off,
Yes.
that's where his dad worked. The building that curved, that's where his dad worked. The building next to it, Kohn Pedersen and Fox, same architects, their inspiration, the 37 bridges on our river. So once we pass this bridge, take a look all the way up. So look at the building to your right and all the way up high. You're going to see the bridge that they have in between. So that was the inspiration, our 37 bridges. The two towers next to it represent our bridge houses on each side of our bridge. And now look all the way down to that gray box. That gray box has 34 digital cameras inside. Every night in the summer at 9 o'clock and at 9:30, we display the world's largest digital show onto that 2.5-acre canvas, onto the merchandise mart. So if you're down here, it's all free. This area is called the Jetty of the River Walk. You can hear the music down here. You can see this from a couple of blocks either way, right? Because it's quite large. But you can only hear the music if you're down below here. The awnings underneath our bridges, architecturally, they're called eyelashes. That is the architectural term. The building on your right, built 60 years apart. Pretty incredible. They followed the same lines, but they built it 60 years apart. So on the left is the 1920s neoclassic, Graham Anderson, Probst and White. And on the right is postmodern, Skidmore and Murals. And then they ended up marrying the two buildings with a singular roof. Definitely the best example of two buildings 60 years apart here in the city. I think it's the best example in the city completely. Remember, the awnings underneath our bridges, they're called eyelashes. The Art Deco building to your right, that's the LaSalle and Wacker building, complete in 1930. When it was complete, it had no air conditioning, so they built a very deep setback on purpose to kind of create an air tunnel, so that when you would open up the windows, you'd get breeze through the tunnel into the building that way. This area of our river walk is called the theater. This is where we're currently their entertainment, right? So they're kind of just watching all the boats go by. The next few buildings I'm going to show you pretty quickly. Ricardo Bofill is the next architect. He's a Portuguese architect influenced by classical European architecture. So if you look to your right, it's a postmodern building with classical European influences. On top is the Greek pediment. So that's the Greek influence on top. And at the bottom and through the columns is the Roman influence. The building next to it, that style of architecture, is called brutalism. And the building next to that, that dark gray building, is the Leo Burnett building, done by two Irish architects, Dinkaloo and Roche. They designed that building to look like a column within a column within a column. A lot of you know Leo Burnett by the advertising campaign. So Leo Burnett gave us Snap Crackle Pop, Rice Krispies, Tony the Tiger, Pillsbury Doughboy, the Meow Mix commercial, the Friendly Skies of United. All that came out of Leo Burnett. And now you guys need to look straight ahead to your 1 o'clock and up high. There's a tall green terracotta building with a gold top. That's an Art Deco building with a gold top. That's the Carbide and Carbon building. It's also now home to the Pendry Hotel. It was completed in 1929 by the Burnham brothers, and we're going to see it again in just a moment. The inspiration for the design, anybody? So it's a tall green building, gold top. The inspiration, a champagne bottle. So now you can see it once you take a look at it, right? The building to your right, that beautiful neoclassic building, that's called the Jewelers Building. Back in the day when it was built in 1927, the merchants inside used to take their jewels back and forth. They didn't leave anything in the building. So inside they built a very unique security system. Inside they would drive their cars in. The elevators were built to bring their cars up to their floor. That was a unique security system back then. Now I remember we did have a few Dark Knight fans, right? So there's another scene in The Dark Knight where Bruce Wayne is doing a benefit, a fundraiser for Harvey Dent, where the Joker breaks in and says, "Where's Harvey Dent?" The building to your right, that modern building, is exactly where it took place. Up top, Bruce Wayne landed his helicopter there. The floor right underneath is where that benefit, that fundraiser took place. The building next to it, that skyscraper, that skinny skyscraper, that is the tallest, skinniest skyscraper here in Chicago. It's called the Mather Tower. It's neo-Gothic in design. That's the design style, is neo-Gothic. We're back to the area that, what I said in 1803, this was Fort Dearborn. So this whole area is Fort Dearborn. And when we're going under the bridge right now, the DuSable Bridge. The bridge was built in 1920. We call it the DuSable Bridge. We named it the DuSable Bridge after our founding father, Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable. I told you that he settled at the mouth of Lake Michigan. The river actually went south. So everything behind me didn't exist until the 1830s. So the river really bent this way and then went that way. It went south at one point. He settled at the mouth, which was right here. He settled right over there on your left. That's called Pioneer Court, where that staircase is next to the Apple Building. That's where his trading post and also his home was. If you cross over after the tour, there's a statue of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable right on top of that area, on top of Pioneer Court. So in 1871, we had the Great Chicago Fire here. We needed to start rebuilding pretty quickly, right? So we ended up needing a place to put all the ash and the rubble. This is where it went. So everything on your left and right side built off a landfill, basically built off of the ashes and the rubble of the Great Chicago Fire. The fourth tallest building, coming up to your right, that's the Aon Center. The Aon Center, the fourth tallest building in Chicago. It is 1,138 feet tall. Edward Durrell Stone is the architect. It's also an $80 million mistake. When they built that building in 1974, they surrounded that building in Carrara marble. They stoned that building Carrara marble. But they didn't test Carrara marble in Chicago winters. So within 10 years, that building started to crack and chip. So they were very concerned it would start to fall off. So they took off all the Carrara marble. They reclad that building. They re-stoned the outside in North Carolina white granite $80 million later. Look at the beautiful wavy building up to your right. That building's called the Aqua. We're going to be seeing that again and talking about that again in just a moment. If you look at the awnings underneath our bridge, remember they're called, you guys remember, eyelashes, right? So that one just has a little bit of makeup on, but it is an eyelash. The building directly to our right, International style, that's the Mies van der Rohe style. Hello, Mr. Bubbleman. So we're going to be passing him on the way back. I'll remember to remind you guys. So the beautiful wavy building, look at the Aqua. So 2009, it was the tallest building in the world, designed by a female architect. The beautiful one with the waves. Lady Gaga lived in that building too. And if any of you have ever seen the Netflix series Ozark, season 1, episode 1, where somebody was tossed out of a building, that's the Aqua, right? But if you know Chicago, tossed out of the Aqua, landed 3 blocks west. So I told you 2009, the Aqua was the tallest building in the world, designed by a female architect. Her name is Jeannie Gang from Studio Gang. She's outdone herself. So now to your right is the 3rd tallest building in Chicago. It's called the St. Regis. It is 1,198 feet tall, but it is the tallest building in the world designed by a female architect, right? So we're pretty proud of her. She's from this area. Didn't really hear any clapping, so I'm going to say it again. It is the tallest building in the world designed by a female architect, right? If you look at the colors that were chosen, she chose 8 different shades of blue glass. She chose those colors on purpose. Our lake is glacier. We have those colors in our lake, so she kind of chose those colors because of our lake. If you look to the 82nd, 83rd floor, you're going to notice that there are no windows, right, on the 82nd, 83rd floor, and that's on purpose. Any building this close to a lake or that tall needs to go through some pretty stringent wind shear tests. So during the testing phase, it didn't pass. So they needed to create an area that the wind can blow through. So that's called a blow-through. Now remember that mass water dam system on the building that looks like it was built upside down? They also, because look at the shape of the building. So that tall tower also has a mass damp water system up on top. They have 400,000 gallons of water up on top of the tallest stack. It's quite a bit taller too. In the 2nd story, the top 2 floors purchased by the same family for $18 million. So the bottom part of the building is the St. Regis Hotel, and the top part are all the residences. I'm going to tell you the story about our river now. If you haven't noticed, we have a beautiful river, right? Our river is a beautiful blue-green color. We get this color because we have a clay bottom, 22 feet deep, clay bottom, and we get glacier water coming in from Lake Michigan. That's what creates this beautiful water. But in the 1800s, our water looked nothing like this. So in the 1800s, everybody that moved to Chicago had no respect for the water at that time. So they dumped everything into the water. It didn't matter if it was human waste, animal waste, the debris from the fire, pollutants, you name it, it was dumped into the water. Our river flowed into the lake. 1885, we have a really nasty storm that moves all of that waste, all of that garbage about a mile into our lake. Where do we get our drinking water? The lake, right? So we needed to figure out a way to reverse the flow of our river. So out west, we knew there was a river called the Des Plaines River that went into the Mississippi, that went into the Gulf of Mexico. So the thought was if we could dig a canal. Now in front of the Des Plaines River is a subcontinental divide. So if we were able to dig a canal through that subcontinental divide long enough and deeper than our river, then we'll be able to reverse the flow. So for 8 years, we dug a canal. 28 miles long, 25 to 30 feet deep. January 2nd, 1900, we blew up the last levee holding back the water. Within 10 to 14 days, our water started going in the other direction. We're happy, right? We couldn't be happier. We're high-fiving, we're having drinks, we're socializing. St. Louis is not happy with us, right? Because it's all going down their direction. So St. Louis sues us. Our defense was the solution to pollution is dilution. That was our defense. After about 6 years, we finally settled the whole case. St. Louis did not win the argument, right? But by 1906, they were okay with it because they're now benefiting from Lake Michigan water going in their direction, so they were kind of okay with it. This is your last opportunity to take pictures of our beautiful city with the city in your backdrop. So from here, you can see that blow through on the St. Regis a little bit clearer. You can also see the spire on top of the Trump International Hotel and Tower. And if anyone is going and walking around the city afterwards and like to use the restroom, this is your final opportunity to use the restroom because we're going to be heading back. So we'll be docking within the next 10 minutes. So he was asking, what did the water do to reverse it? How did it help us? Well, it moved all that waste. So it moves it now to the Des Plaines, to the Mississippi, and out to the Gulf of Mexico. So eventually, all of that debris ended up going out to the Gulf of Mexico, cleaning up our river, our system here. Yeah, we don't use that anymore. We don't really dirty our water anymore. So we have other ways now. So yeah, but back then, that's what helped us clean out our river and move all of that out into the Gulf of Mexico. So we had passed the Navy Pier that was to your right, and you guys, I don't know if you noticed that beautiful Ferris wheel on our pier. That Ferris wheel came to us in 2016. That's a temperature-controlled Ferris wheel. We always have a Ferris wheel on our pier to pay homage to our 1893 World Fair. So in 1893, we had the World Fair here. It was called the World Columbian Exposition. And we wanted to build something grand, something bigger and better than what they built at the World Fair prior. The World Fair prior to that fair was in Paris. They built the Eiffel Tower. So we needed to come up with something bigger and grander than the Eiffel Tower. So a guy named George Ferris, who was a bridge builder, was given that task. But he didn't want to build a bridge, right? So he wanted to do something a little bit more unique. He decided he was going to build a Ferris wheel. So the first Ferris wheel ever had 36 cars around it. Each car was the size of a train car. So each car could hold 60 people. So the first Ferris wheel ever built, and that was for our fair, was able to hold 2,160 people in one spin, right? So people back then paid 50 cents a person for 2 spins. We had 27 million people visit that World Fair in 1893, so it was a huge success. If you look to your right, the building here is called River 1 and River 2. They're sisters buildings. James DeStefano is the architect. They were built in 2004. The townhomes underneath, each one of the townhomes have their own elevators to take them to their rooftop deck. So that's quite nice, right? A nice little luxury there. In River 2, the inspiration for that building, the architect, James DiStefano, he was inspired by something. Any idea? If you look to the top? Statue of Liberty, exactly, right? So architects are always inspired by either another architect, something that they saw, a pack of cigarettes, a bottle of champagne, something, but they're usually typically inspired by something for their design. The fountain next to us here, that's called Centennial Fountain, that was built to commemorate the 100th year reversal of our river. The center was meant to look like the canal that they built through that subcontinental divide. So that's kind of where Dirk Lohan is the architect that designed that. And we talked about the 1800s, how we really didn't have any respect for our water, and our water was so polluted. But now we are really paying homage to our river. And look at the window colors that are chosen along the river here. So they choose the colors now. A lot of our buildings choose the color of our river to kind of have the reflection both, you know, in the river and up in the air now. We also do something pretty unique to our river. We dye our river green on St. Patrick's Day. So we dye, our plumbers union comes out here, they have a secret sauce that they've come up with. They won't tell anybody what's in it, but it's all plant-based, that we know. They put that into the water and it dyes our river green, a beautiful fluorescent green, kind of like a Superman kryptonite color green. It stays that way for about 3 days. If you guys look up high to your right, that's the NBC Tower. The NBC Tower was built to look like the building in New York City in Rockefeller Center. That was the inspiration. So Adrian Smith, this one right here, once we get under the bridge, yeah. So we'll get under the bridge again. So Adrian Smith wanted to build a building that looked just like that one in Rockefeller Center. So we ended up building an Art Deco building here in Chicago, a modern Art Deco building, but it looks very similar to the one in New York City. I'm going to show you the 5th tallest building now in Chicago. As soon as we pass the NBC Tower, look straight ahead to the north and between those 2 glass buildings. That is the 5th tallest building with the 2 antennas on top. That is the John Hancock building. It is 1,128 feet tall. It does not include the antenna in the height. Now you guys can take a look at the beautiful Wrigley building, right? The Wrigley building built on the south side in 1921, on the north side in 1923. That style of architecture is Beaux-Art. So you have beautiful ornate bottom, ornate top. After you get off the boat, if you have an opportunity to walk around that building, it really is exquisite. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. That tower, that clock tower, the inspiration for that tower was the Giraldo Tower in Seville, Spain. Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White are the architects that did the Wrigley building. And now look to your right and up high. That's the last building we'll talk about today on our tour. That's the Tribune Tower. The Tribune Tower, built in 1925. That style of architecture is neo-Gothic. So you have that Notre Dame Cathedral look on the top. And embedded in the building are artifacts from all over the world, so it's another building to walk by. The Tribune wanted the most beautiful building in the world built. So they ended up having a contest. They were going to give away $100,000 to whoever designed them the most beautiful building in the world. Hood and Howell ended up winning that design contest, so they got that $100,000. We're going to be docking pretty much in back of the Lucia boat, so it's a little different from where you guys started. So we'll be docking in back of this boat right here. In order to get back up, you're going to walk up these stairs here, and then there's a sidewalk that'll go in between the Wrigley building. There's also an elevator. So if you need an elevator, that's that green elevator on the side there. So you can take that up. Our Chicago flag has 4 red stars. The first star is Fort Dearborn. The second star is the Great Chicago Fire. The third star is the 1893 World Columbian Exposition, and the fourth red star is the 1933 Century of Progress World Fair. So you can remember it by Fort Dearborn, Fire, Fair, Fair. The two blue stripes, one for the lake, one for the river, and the three white stripes are our territories. So you have the south side of Chicago, the north side of Chicago, and the west side of Chicago. Okay, so over these last 90 minutes, I think you've learned more about Chicago, right, than you thought you'd ever learn about Chicago. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So on behalf of Wendella, on behalf of the 90-minute River Architectural Tour, thank you. My name is Lori. I'm going to try to be the first one off the boat to properly thank you and to answer, just in case you have more questions, right? To answer any other questions that you might have that I didn't have an opportunity to ask. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and mic drop. So thank you again. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank